I never imagined my own son would be capable of humiliating me like this in front of a judge, in front of strangers, in front of the entire world. There I was, Arthur, 65 years old, sitting on that cold bench in the Boston courthouse, listening to Roger say the cruelest words a father could ever hear. Your Honor, my father is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. He doesn't have the money to support himself. He lives like a vagrant in that old house, without resources, without anything. His voice sounded so sure, so convincing, that for a moment even I doubted my own reality. Tears burned in my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down, not there, not in front of everyone. Claire, my daughter-in-law, nodded from her seat as if she were the most concerned woman in the world. That hypocrite never lifted a finger to help me, always viewing me as a burden on her husband's life. It's for the best, Your Honor. He needs constant supervision. He can't keep living alone in these conditions. I wanted to get up and shout that she knew absolutely nothing about my conditions, that she had never bothered to ask how I really was. But there she was, acting like a model daughter-in-law, worried about her father-in-law's well-being. Roger's lawyer continued with his poisonous speech. Mr. Arthur has shown clear signs of financial deterioration. His house is in bad condition, he has no visible income, and frankly, Your Honor, we believe he needs to be placed under guardianship for his own protection. Every word was like a stab. Guardianship for me. After all I had worked for, all I had built, all I had sacrificed for this family, I felt so small at that moment, so invisible, as if my whole life had been worthless. The courtroom was packed with people looking at me with pity. I could feel their eyes on me, judging me, evaluating me, as if I were a broken object that needed to be repaired or discarded. Roger kept talking, each phrase more painful than the last. My father doesn't understand the value of money, Your Honor. He lives in a fantasy where he believes everything is fine. But the reality is, he's on the verge of destitution. Fantasy. He called me delusional, the child I raised, to whom I gave everything, who never had to worry about a thing because I took care of everything. My grandson Matthew was sitting in the back of the room. He was the only one who looked at me with love, with understanding. His green eyes were filled with tears, and it broke my heart to see him suffer over this situation. He knew something wasn't right, that his father was lying. But he was only a 16-year-old teenager. What could he do against all that legal machinery Roger had put in motion? I smiled faintly, trying to reassure him. But inside I felt myself crumbling piece by piece. The judge looked at me with that expression I had seen so many times directed at the elderly, a mix of compassion and condescension. Mr. Arthur, do you have anything to say in your defense? His voice was kind, but I could tell he had already made up his mind. Everyone had made up their mind. I was the crazy old man who couldn't handle life, who needed others to decide for him. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 65 years on my shoulders. Your Honor, I began, but Roger immediately interrupted me. Your Honor, as you can see, my father is confused. He can't even articulate a coherent response. The room filled with murmurs. Some people even laughed softly. They were laughing at me, who had built everything from scratch, who had worked day and night to give my family a decent life. The sound of that laughter pierced my soul like knives. It was the greatest humiliation of my life, and it came from the person I loved most in the world, my own son. Claire moved closer to Roger and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and addressed the judge again. Your Honor, My wife and I are prepared to take charge of the few assets my father may have. It's not much, but we will do everything in our power to ensure him a dignified end. Dignified end. They were talking about me as if I were already dead, as if my life had ended and all that was left was to wait to be buried. Anger began to rise inside me, but I kept it controlled. It wasn't time yet. The defense attorney Roger had hired to represent me seemed more interested in his phone than in my case. He had obviously been bought off or convinced that it was better not to complicate things. Every time I tried to speak, he silenced me with gestures, as if my voice didn't matter, as if my words were irrelevant. It was clear that everything was arranged, that this hearing was just a formality before they declared me incompetent and Roger took control of everything. But there was something none of them knew, something that would change everything. For the past few months, I had noticed changes in Roger that deeply worried me. He was no longer the sweet child I had raised, but a bitter, resentful man who seemed to blame me for all his problems. It all started after my wife died 2 years ago. My wife, Roger's mother, had been the emotional pillar of the family, and when she died, something broke in him. But instead of turning to me so we could comfort each other, Roger became cold and distant. He started questioning every decision I made, every dollar I spent, every move I made in my own house. "Dad, you can't keep living like this," he constantly told me. "This house is too big for you. You spend too much on unnecessary things. You don't have a steady income." His words were like tiny daggers plunging into my heart every time he came to visit. Claire supported him in everything, of course. She saw a golden opportunity in my situation. She knew my house was in a highly valuable area of the city, and her eyes shone every time she talked about what we could do with that money if we sold it. The pressure started subtly. First, it was comments about my age, about how dangerous it was for an older man to live alone. Then they started bringing brochures for senior living communities, beautiful places where you could make friends your age, Dad. The idea made my stomach turn. I wasn't ready to be warehoused in a place like that, as if I were a useless object that needed to be stored until it completely deteriorated. But what hurt most was seeing how Roger had changed with Matthew, my grandson. Before, we were very close. Matthew would come to visit every weekend. He would tell me his secrets, his dreams, his problems at school. But Roger began limiting those visits. "Grandpa's too busy," he would say. "Oh, we don't want to bother him." It was a lie, of course. I was never too busy for my grandson. Matthew was the light of my life, the only reason it was worth continuing to fight. One afternoon, Matthew managed to sneak away and came to see me. He was crying. "Grandpa, Dad says you're going crazy, that you're forgetting things, that you can't take care of yourself anymore. But I know it's not true. You always remember everything. You're always fine." His words broke my heart, because they confirmed what I already suspected. Roger was preparing the groundwork for what would happen in court. He was building a narrative in which I was a senile old man. "Don't worry, kiddo," I told him, hugging him tightly. "Things will be okay. I just need you to trust me, all right?" Matthew nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew something terrible was about to happen, even if he didn't understand exactly what. That night, after he left, I stayed awake thinking about everything I had built over the years, everything I had kept secret to protect my family. You see, Roger knew nothing about my real life. To him, I was simply his widowed father, living on a pension and some savings. I never told him about the investments I had made over 40 years, about the properties I had discreetly bought in different states. about the empire I had built brick by brick while he was growing up. I did it this way because I believed it was best, because I wanted my son to strive on his own merits, not to depend on my money to make something of his life. My late wife knew part of the truth, but she respected my decision to remain discreet. She knew I had some businesses, but I never gave her all the details. It was my secret, my personal project, my way of securing the family's future without creating dependence or laziness. For decades, while Roger went to school, college, got married, and had Matthew, I quietly continued working, expanding my investments, buying properties in strategic locations. I had apartment buildings in Florida, vacation homes in California, commercial properties in New York City, and land in the Texas that had appreciated incredibly. In the San Francisco Bay Area, I had bought 3 waterfront properties that were now worth a fortune. I also had investments in Canada and in Mexico, places where real estate demand never stopped growing. I had done all of this with the help of Robert Johnson, my longtime accountant and financial advisor, a discreet and trustworthy man who had been like a brother to me. Robert knew every detail of my finances. He managed my accounts, oversaw the rentals, and reinvested the profits. He was the only one who knew that my monthly income exceeded $40,000 from all my properties and investments. He was the only one who understood why I lived so simply, despite having so much money. "Arthur," Robert often told me, "your children should know the truth. It's unfair for them to think you're in poverty when you're one of the most successful men I know." But I always gave him the same answer. "Robert, money changes people. I've seen families destroyed by inheritances, children who become lazy because they know their parents will support them, grandchildren who grow up without values because they never had to fight for anything. I don't want that for Roger or for Matthew." He respected my decision, even though he didn't always agree. Now, sitting in that courtroom, listening to my own son talk about me as if I were destitute, I began to wonder if I had made the right decision. Roger continued his masterful performance. "Your Honor, my father refuses to admit his situation. He insists everything is fine when clearly it is not. He doesn't have adequate heat in the winter. He eats very little to save money. He wears old, patched clothing. It's heartbreaking to see him deteriorate because of pride." Every word was a perfectly constructed lie. I didn't have the heat on because I preferred wearing coats. I ate little because I was watching my health. I wore simple clothes because I didn't need to impress anyone. Claire stood up to add her testimony. "Your Honor, my father-in-law constantly rejects our help. When we offer him money for house repairs, he says he doesn't need it. When we suggest he move to a smaller, easier-to-maintain place, he gets angry and throws us out of his house. He is clearly in denial about his financial situation." The room murmured with understanding. Everyone thought I was a stubborn, proud old man who preferred to suffer rather than accept help. What none of them understood was that I rejected their help because I knew exactly what their true intentions were. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to control me. They wanted me to sell my house so they could keep the money. They wanted me to move to a retirement home so they could forget about me. They wanted me to sign papers that would give them power over my decisions. All this time, they believed I had nothing more than that house and some insignificant savings. The judge seemed increasingly convinced that Roger was right. His questions toward me were condescending, as if he were speaking to a small child who didn't understand what was happening around him. "Mr. Arthur, do you understand why your family is concerned?" he asked me with that soft voice they use with the mentally ill. I wanted to shout that I understood perfectly, that what I didn't understand was how my own son had become so greedy and cruel. But I remained silent. waiting for the perfect moment. I knew Robert was on his way. I had sent him a message before entering the courtroom, activating the plan we had discussed for months. If things came to this extreme, if Roger truly tried to declare me incompetent, Robert had specific instructions on what to do. He had all the documents, all the papers, all the proof of who I really was and what I had built throughout my life. The hearing continued, and I could feel the trap Roger had so carefully prepared closing in. But he didn't know that I also had a trap, a much more powerful one that would change everything in a matter of minutes. Roger's lawyer took out a folder full of papers and began presenting what he called proof of my incompetence. Your Honor, we have documented multiple incidents that demonstrate Mr. Arthur's mental and financial deterioration. My heart raced. What kind of proof could they have? What lies had they fabricated to justify this farce? The man began reading a list that chilled my blood. Mr. Arthur forgets to pay bills on time. He has been seen talking to himself in the garden. He buys excess food that later spoils. And according to neighbor testimonies, he sometimes leaves the house without remembering where he was going. Every accusation was a cruel distortion of reality. Yes, sometimes I paid bills a few days late, but not because I forgot them, but because I meticulously reviewed each one before paying it. It was a habit I had developed over years to control my expenses, not a sign of dementia. And yes, I talked in the garden, but not alone, but on the phone with Robert, while walking among my plants, discussing investments and financial strategies. The neighbors, obviously, couldn't hear my phone conversations from their windows. The story about the food spoiling was particularly cruel. I bought large amounts of vegetables and fruit because I distributed them among needy families in the neighborhood. There was a lady with 3 children who worked as a housekeeper, and I brought her bags of groceries every week. There was also an old man who lived alone 2 blocks away, and I made sure he had fresh food. But of course, Roger never bothered to ask me why I bought so much. He simply assumed the worst and used it against me. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. Arthur has begun to show signs of paranoia. He tells his grandson that there are things he can't say, that he has important secrets, and that one day everything will be revealed. These are clear indicators of delusional thinking in older adults. The room murmured with concern. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Matthew had recounted these conversations. My own grandson had been interrogated and manipulated to provide ammunition against me. I looked back and saw Matthew with tears streaming down his cheeks. His eyes pleaded for forgiveness. I could read the words on his lips. I'm sorry, Grandpa. My poor grandson had been used as a pawn in his father's dirty game. Roger had probably pressured him. He had made him feel guilty. He had convinced him that telling these details would help Grandpa. Matthew had no idea that every word he had innocently spoken would be distorted and used as evidence of my alleged dementia. Roger stood up again. Your Honor, my father has always been a very hard-working and responsible man. That's why this situation is so painful for our family. Seeing him deteriorate, seeing him lose the ability to manage his life, is heartbreaking. But we cannot let pride prevent us from doing the right thing. He needs professional help. He needs someone to make responsible decisions for him before it's too late. His performance was perfect. The tears in his eyes seemed genuine. His voice trembled with just the right amount of emotion. If I didn't know the truth, even I would have believed his story. The judge seemed completely convinced. I understand the difficulty of this situation, Mr. Roger. It's clear you love your father and want the best for him, he said, turning to me with that condescending look I knew all too well. Mr. Arthur, do you understand your family's concerns? Are you willing to accept the help they're offering you? It was a trap question. If I said yes, I would be admitting I needed help and justifying the guardianship. If I said no, I would confirm the narrative that I was a stubborn, delusional old man. Your Honor, I began with a firm voice, I understand my family's concerns perfectly. I also understand their motivations perfectly. Roger shot me a warning look as if telling me not to say anything that could complicate his plans. But I had already come too far. However, I believe there is important information that must be considered before any decision is made about my future. Roger's lawyer stood up immediately. Your Honor, as you can see, Mr. Arthur is confused about the nature of these proceedings. There is no additional relevant information. The facts are clear and documented, but I wasn't going to let them silence me this time. Your Honor, I respectfully request that additional relevant documentation be presented for this case. My accountant, Mr. Robert, has up-to-date financial information that I believe would significantly change this court's perspective. The mention of Robert made Roger pale slightly. He knew who he was. He knew he had been the family accountant for decades, but he had no idea the extent of his knowledge about my affairs. Claire leaned toward him and whispered something in his ear. I could see the worry growing on their faces. Your Honor, Roger's lawyer said quickly, we don't see the relevance of additional financial information. We have already established that Mr. Arthur has no significant resources. But the judge seemed intrigued by my request. Mr. Arthur, are you saying you have financial documentation that has not been presented to this court? I nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor, very relevant documentation. The judge looked at the clock and then toward a courtroom door. Is your accountant present today? At that perfect moment, as if it had been choreographed, the courtroom doors opened and Robert walked in. He was a 60-year-old man, distinguished, with perfectly combed gray hair and an elegant suit that radiated professionalism and success. He carried a black leather briefcase and walked with the confidence of someone who had spent decades managing the finances of very important people. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. This was not the accountant for a poor, incapable old man. This was clearly a high-level professional. Pardon the interruption, Your Honor, Robert said with a clear and authoritative voice. I am Robert Johnson, a certified public accountant and financial advisor to Mr. Arthur for the past 25 years. I understand that matters related to my client's financial capacity are being discussed, and I have crucial information that must be considered before any decision is made. Roger's lawyer immediately stood up. Your Honor, this is irregular. Unscheduled witnesses cannot be allowed to enter. But the judge raised his hand to silence him. Mr. Johnson, what kind of information do you have? Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder filled with perfectly organized documents. Your Honor, I have here Mr. Arthur's complete financial statements, including properties, investments, and monthly income flows. Information which, I fear, significantly contradicts the claims that have been made about his economic situation. The silence in the room was deafening. Roger had lost all color in his face. Claire looked like she had swallowed her tongue. Even the lawyer supposedly representing me seemed surprised. I kept my expression serene, but inside I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because the truth was finally coming out. Sadness because it had come to this point with my own family. Your Honor, Robert continued, Mr. Arthur not only does not need financial guardianship, but he is, in fact, one of my most successful clients. His monthly income exceeds $40,000, derived from real estate properties in 8 different states and various high-yield investments. Far from being an incapable old man, he is a shrewd businessman who has built a considerable empire over the last 4 decades. Robert's words fell like bombs in the room. I could hear muffled gasps, murmurs of disbelief, the sound of papers falling to the floor. Roger had gone completely pale and was clutching Claire's arm as if he were about to faint. The judge's expression had completely changed, from condescending pity to professional intrigue. It was the moment I had been waiting for months. The truth, finally, was coming to light. The judge leaned forward, clearly fascinated by this unexpected turn. "Mr. Johnson, are you saying that Mr. Arthur owns properties valued at several $1,000,000? Robert nodded with professional calm. "Exactly, Your Honor. Mr. Arthur possesses a diversified real estate portfolio that includes apartment buildings in Florida valued at $18 million, vacation homes in California worth $9 million, commercial properties in New York City that generate $50,000 in monthly rent, and land in Texas that has appreciated by 400% in the last 10 years. Roger stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and humiliation. "This is impossible. My father doesn't have money. He lives like a vagrant." His voice had lost all composure, all the calculated elegance he had shown during the hearing. Now he sounded like what he really was, a desperate man watching his plan crumble before his eyes. "Your Honor, this must be some kind of scam. My father can't have that money." "Mr. Roger," the judge said in a firm voice, "please maintain composure in my courtroom." Then he turned to Robert. "Mr. Johnson, can you provide documentation to support these claims?" Robert smiled slightly and began pulling documents from his briefcase. "Of course, Your Honor. Here are the property deeds, bank statements, rental contracts, and the most recent appraisal reports, all duly authenticated and certified." As Robert organized the documents on the table, I watched my family's faces. Roger seemed to be in shock. His mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Claire had started sweating profusely and was constantly loosening the collar of her blouse. Her dream of seizing my few assets had turned into the nightmare of discovering they had tried to swindle a multimillionaire. The lawyer Roger had hired to represent me looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. "Your Honor," Robert continued, "I must also mention that Mr. Arthur owns 3 waterfront properties in the San Francisco Bay Area, 2 villas in Canada, and a commercial building in Mexico. Furthermore, he has investments in mutual funds, treasury bonds, and stocks that generate significant monthly dividends. His total net worth exceeds $75 million. The number floated in the air like a bomb that had exploded in slow motion. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the court clerk had stopped writing and was staring open-mouthed. $75 million. The destitute old man who needed guardianship had $75 million. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. But I held back. This was not a time for celebration. It was a time for the truth to be fully established. Roger finally found his voice, though it was only a broken whisper. "But, Dad, you always said you didn't have money. You always lived so simply. You never bought expensive things. You never traveled. You never—" His voice trailed off as he began to grasp the magnitude of what he had done. He had accused his millionaire father of being an incapable old man who needed guardianship. "Roger," I said in a calm but firm voice, "I lived simply because I chose to. I lived discreetly because I wanted you and Matthew to learn the value of work, of humility, of achieving things on your own merit. I never told you about the money because I hoped you would be a good man without needing to know there was an inheritance waiting for you." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from deep disappointment. The judge intervened. "Mr. Johnson, has Mr. Arthur personally managed these investments and properties?" Robert nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, Your Honor." Mr. Arthur is one of the shrewdest investors I have known in my 30-year career. Every purchase decision, every investment strategy, every financial move was personally initiated and approved by him. Far from showing mental deterioration, his recent decisions have been particularly brilliant. In fact, Robert continued, just 3 months ago, Mr. Arthur identified a commercial real estate investment opportunity in New York City that generated a 20% return in only 90 days. His ability to analyze markets and make financial decisions is completely intact. The contrast between this description and the image of a senile old man Roger had painted was so extreme it was almost comical. Claire finally spoke, her voice trembling. "But, Mr. Arthur, you never told us anything. We always thought that I was poor." I finished her sentence. "Yes, Claire, I know. And the question is, why did you never bother to ask me directly about my situation, instead of assuming and planning how to seize what you thought were my only assets?" Her eyes filled with panic as she realized that I had perfectly understood their intentions from the beginning. "Your Honor," said Robert, "I must also inform you that Mr. Arthur has been considering making significant donations to various charities. He had planned to leave part of his estate to his family, of course. But he also wanted to contribute to educational and social assistance causes. However, recent events have caused him to reconsider these decisions." The message was clear. Not only had they lost the chance to control my assets, but they had jeopardized their own inheritance. Roger slumped in his chair as if all his strength had left him. "Dad, I didn't know. I thought that..." But his words sounded hollow, because the reality was that he had never asked. He had never shown genuine interest in my well-being, only in what he could get from me. For months he had planned this hearing. He had constructed lies about my supposed incompetence. He had manipulated his own son to get testimony against me. "Your Honor," Robert continued, "there is another important aspect that must be considered. Mr. Arthur maintained this financial discretion not due to mental deterioration or paranoia, but as a very calculated strategy for asset and family protection. He wanted to ensure that his heirs developed character and their own work before having access to the family wealth. That was exactly right. That had been my philosophy for decades." Roger's lawyer finally tried to regain some control over the situation. "Your Honor, even if these documents are authentic, this doesn't change the fact that Mr. Arthur has demonstrated erratic behaviors." But Robert interrupted him gently. "Are you referring to behaviors like making successful multi-million-dollar investments, or behaviors like maintaining regular correspondence with property managers in 8 different states? Or perhaps you are referring to his habit of personally reviewing every monthly financial statement I send him?" The destruction of Roger's narrative was complete. Every piece of evidence of my supposed incompetence had been recontextualized as signs of a brilliant financial mind operating in secret. My mysterious conversations in the garden were consultations about international investments. My excessive food purchases were acts of charity for needy neighbors. My refusal to accept help was the logical response of a man who knew he didn't need it. The judge had been taking notes furiously throughout Robert's presentation. Finally, he looked up and gave me a completely different expression, one filled with respect and professional curiosity. "Mr. Arthur, is there anything you would like to say to this court about this situation?" It was my moment. After months of humiliation, of lies, of being treated like a senile old man, I finally had the opportunity to speak with my own voice and be heard with respect. I stood up slowly, not from weakness, but with dignity. It was time for everyone to understand who Arthur really was and why the time had come for the truth to fully come to light. I stood up with all the dignity I had accumulated in 65 years of life, feeling for the first time in months that my voice would be heard with the respect it deserved. Your Honor, for the past 40 years I have built my wealth with hard work, intelligent decisions, and a great deal of discretion. I never flaunted my wealth because I firmly believe that money does not define a person's character. But unfortunately, I discovered that the lack of money doesn't define it either. What truly defines character is how someone treats their loved ones when they believe they have nothing to offer. Roger buried his face in his hands, but I continued without mercy. My son came to this court today to declare me incompetent, not out of genuine love or concern, but because he wanted to seize what he believed were my only assets, my house. For months, he pressured me to sell it. He brought me brochures for nursing homes. He limited my grandson's visits, and he built a systematic campaign to convince everyone that I had lost my mind. All this without ever asking me directly about my real situation. Your Honor, Roger's lawyer interrupted desperately. My client acted in good faith, concerned about his father's well-being. But I raised my hand to stop him. No, Counselor. Your client acted out of greed. If he were genuinely concerned about my well-being, he would have spoken to me. He would have asked questions. He would have spent time with me to assess my actual mental state. Instead, he conspired to declare me incompetent based on assumptions and lies. Allow me to tell this court what really happened during these last few months. I continued, feeling strength return to my voice. Roger began visiting me more often, but not to comfort me in my widowhood, but to inspect my house, evaluate its value, and look for proof that I couldn't care for myself. He checked my refrigerator to see what food I had. He looked at my bills when I wasn't watching, and he asked loaded questions to try to get me to say something he could use against me. Roger lifted his head and looked at me with tears in his eyes. Dad, I just wanted to help. But his voice broke because he knew I was right. Roger, if you had wanted to help me, you would have asked me what I needed. If you had wanted to help me, you would have respected my decisions about my own life. If you had wanted to help me, you wouldn't have manipulated your own son to get testimony against me. The judge turned to Roger with a serious expression. Mr. Roger, is it true that you questioned your minor son to obtain information about his grandfather? I just asked him if Grandpa had said strange things, Roger stammered. And you used that information to build a case of mental incompetence without verifying the facts, the judge insisted. Roger couldn't answer. Your Honor, I continued, my grandson Matthew was used as a pawn in this dirty game. A 16-year-old teenager was manipulated into providing evidence against his own grandfather, without understanding that his innocent words would be distorted to justify declaring me incompetent. This is not only cruel to me, but profoundly harmful to a minor who loves his grandfather and doesn't understand the betrayal he has been involved in. I looked at Matthew, who was silently crying in the back of the room. Matthew, my boy, I want you to know that I don't blame you for anything. You were honest when they asked you about our conversations. You didn't know your words would be used to hurt me. The mistake wasn't yours. It was the adults who put you in that position. Matthew nodded through his tears, and I could see something akin to relief in his eyes. Your Honor, said Robert, I would like to add that throughout all these years, Mr. Arthur has demonstrated an exceptional capacity for long-term planning. Not only did he build his estate, but he also established educational funds for his grandchildren, emergency funds for needy family members, and scheduled donations to charities. A person with mental deterioration could not have orchestrated such complex and effective financial strategies. Furthermore, Robert continued, Mr. Arthur speaks 3 languages fluently. which has allowed him to negotiate directly with sellers and buyers in different countries. Just 2 weeks ago, he held a 2-hour video conference with real estate developers in Canada, discussing the technical details of a renovation that will increase the value of his properties there by 30%. These are not the behaviors of a person with impaired mental capacity. Claire finally found her voice, though it trembled noticeably. Mr. Arthur, if you had so much money, why did you live so austerely? It was a question that completely revealed her mindset. To her, having money necessarily meant spending it on visible luxuries. Claire, I replied with a sad smile, I lived simply because I found happiness in simple things. I didn't need a luxury car to feel valuable. I didn't need expensive clothes to know who I was. I didn't need a huge house to feel at home. But more importantly, I continued, I lived discreetly because I wanted to teach my family the right values. I wanted Roger to work for his own merit. I wanted Matthew to learn that happiness doesn't come from money, but from character. I wanted all of you to love me for who I was, not for what I had. Unfortunately, my experiment failed. The words fell like stones into still water. Your Honor, Roger's lawyer said in a desperate voice, even if these documents are authentic, the behavior of concealing wealth can be interpreted as a sign of paranoia or... But Robert interrupted him firmly. Are you suggesting that discreet estate planning is evidence of mental illness? Because in that case, I would have to declare most of my high net worth clients incompetent, including several prominent judges, doctors, and businessmen in this city. The judge had heard enough. Counselor, I understand you are representing your client's interests, but the evidence presented is overwhelmingly clear. Mr. Arthur is not only mentally competent, but he is an exceptional businessman who has successfully managed a complex estate for decades. Then he turned to Roger with a severe expression. Mr. Roger, do you have anything to say about these developments? Roger stood up, trembling. His face had lost all color, and he looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. Your Honor, I truly thought my father was in trouble. I thought he was suffering, that he had no resources, that... His voice broke completely. I thought I was helping. But even he knew his words sounded empty after everything that had been revealed. Roger, I said in a firm but not cruel voice, you didn't think you were helping me. You thought you were helping yourself. For months you planned this hearing. You constructed lies about my mental state. You manipulated testimony, and you conspired to seize my assets. If you truly wanted to help me, you would have started by asking me what I needed. The silence that followed was deafening. Your Honor, I continued, I respectfully request that these guardianship proceedings be dismissed immediately. As it has been clearly demonstrated, I have full mental and financial capacity to manage my own affairs. Furthermore, I request that an investigation be conducted into whether there was an attempt at fraud or conspiracy in presenting false evidence to this court. The words fell like a final sentence. Roger collapsed in his chair as if he had been physically struck. The reality of what he had done and the consequences he would face finally hit him completely. Not only had he lost any chance of controlling my assets, but he now faced possible legal charges for his actions. Claire seemed to be in shock, probably mentally calculating how this situation would affect her own reputation and career. Your Honor, said Robert, I would like to request that a temporary protection order be issued to prevent any future attempts at harassment or manipulation against Mr. Arthur or his minor grandson. It was a measure we had discussed previously. After months of psychological pressure and manipulation, I needed formal legal protection. The judge nodded. Granted. A temporary restraining order is issued prohibiting Roger and Claire from contacting Mr. Arthur or approaching his residence without his express consent. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Roger sobbed upon hearing this. The reality that he had lost not only the right to my money, but also the right to see me, finally hit him completely. I stood up slowly and headed toward Matthew, who was still sitting in the back of the room with tears streaming down his cheeks. "Matthew, my boy, come here." He got up and ran to me, hugging me with a desperation that broke my heart. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I didn't know Dad was lying about you. I didn't know they would hurt you because of what I said." His words were interrupted by sobs. "My dear boy," I whispered in his ear, "you have nothing to apologize for. You were honest when they asked you about our conversations. The problem wasn't your words, but how the adults used them." I hugged him tighter, feeling him tremble in my arms. "And I want you to know that none of this changes the love I feel for you. You will always be my dear grandson." Roger approached hesitantly. "Dad, please don't take Matthew away from me. He's my son." His voice was pleading, but I stood my ground. "Roger, Matthew will still be your son, but you have demonstrated that you are willing to use him as a weapon against your own family. I need time to evaluate what kind of relationship will be safe for him in the future." The words were harsh, but necessary. "Your Honor," I intervened, "I request that supervised visits be established between Matthew and his father until it can be adequately assessed whether the environment is emotionally safe for the minor." The judge considered the request. "Given the evidence of manipulation of the minor in these proceedings, I consider this a reasonable precaution. A psychological evaluation is ordered to determine the minor's best interest." Claire finally found her voice, though it trembled noticeably. "Mr. Arthur, is there any way we can resolve this as a family? Without courts, without lawyers?" But I stopped her with an icy gaze. "Claire, you had the opportunity to resolve this as a family for 2 years. Instead, you chose conspiracy and deceit. Some decisions cannot be undone." Robert came closer and handed me a folder. "Arthur, these are the documents we discussed. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I nodded firmly. It was time to make the most difficult decisions of my life, but also the most necessary. "Yes, Robert. It's time for everyone to understand the full consequences of their actions." I opened the folder and took out several legal documents. "Your Honor, these are documents establishing major changes to my estate and testamentary planning. Following today's events, I have decided to completely revise how my inheritance will be distributed." Roger paled even more, if that was possible. Finally, he was beginning to understand the real cost of his betrayal. "Roger," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "for 40 years I worked to build an estate that I could leave to my family. I dreamed of the day I could reveal everything I had accomplished and see pride and gratitude in your eyes. Instead, I discovered that my own son was willing to declare me incompetent to steal what he believed were my only assets. Every word was like a sentence being pronounced. Therefore," I continued, "I have made the decision to substantially modify my testamentary plans. The portion I had allocated for you will be redirected to Matthew's educational fund and to charities that help elderly victims of family abuse." Roger put his hands over his mouth, stifling a cry of desperation. The financial reality of his betrayal finally hit him with full force. "Grandpa," Matthew said in a small voice, "you don't need to change anything for me. I just want you to be okay." His genuine concern for my well-being, in contrast to his father's, was like a ray of light in the darkness of that terrible day. "Matthew, my boy, this is not a punishment for you. It is protection for you. Your father has shown that he is willing to use his own family to get money. I cannot allow you to face that pressure in the future." Roger's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. "Your Honor, my client is obviously under extreme emotional stress. Perhaps family mediation sessions could be considered." But the judge stopped him immediately. "Counselor, your client attempted to defraud his own father. There is no possible mediation for this. Mr. Arthur's decisions regarding his estate are entirely his own, and this court fully respects them." Roger finally broke down completely. "Dad, I beg you. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm your son. You raised me. There must be some love left." His words were filled with genuine pain, but also a desperation that revealed his main concern was still financial. "Roger," I replied in a weary voice, "love doesn't disappear, but trust does. And without trust, there can be no real relationship. Furthermore," I continued, "you need to understand that the consequences of your actions go beyond money. You have damaged your relationship with Matthew, who now knows that his father is willing to lie and manipulate to get what he wants. You have damaged your relationship with me in a way that might be irreparable. And you have damaged your own integrity in a way you will have to live with forever." The judge stood up, indicating that the hearing was over. "Mr. Arthur, this court wishes you the best in the future. It is clear that you are a man of extraordinary resources, both financial and personal. I hope you can find peace after this traumatic experience." His words were kind, but they couldn't heal the pain of the family betrayal I had experienced. As I left the courthouse, Matthew walked beside me, still clinging to my arm. Roger and Claire walked behind us, defeated and humiliated. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. I had won a complete legal battle. I had protected my estate and my autonomy, but I had lost my son in the process. It was a victory that tasted like ashes in my mouth. As we left the courthouse, Robert accompanied me to his car, while Matthew clung to my arm as if he feared I would disappear. The sunlight seemed strangely bright after the dark hours we had spent inside. "Arthur," Robert said softly, "are you sure about the decisions you made in there? Once these documents are processed, it will be very difficult to reverse the changes." I nodded firmly. "Robert, we've been discussing this moment for years. I hoped it would never be necessary, but Roger forced me to make this decision." Matthew turned to me with fresh tears in his eyes. "Grandpa, what's going to happen now? Will I not be able to see Dad anymore?" His question broke my heart because it revealed the confusion and pain of a teenager caught in adult conflict. "My boy," I told him, sitting on a bench near the courthouse to be at his level, "you will always be able to see your dad. But for now, until things calm down, visits will have to be supervised to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Matthew asked, although I think he already knew the answer. "To protect you from being used as a weapon again. Your father, my son, asked you questions about me and used your answers to try to hurt me. That's not right, and I won't allow it to happen again." Matthew nodded slowly, showing a maturity that impressed and saddened me at the same time. No teenager should have to understand these family complexities. Behind us, I could hear Roger and Claire arguing in low voices. Fragments of their conversation reached me. "How could you not know? You thought he was poor too. Now we face criminal charges because of you. He was your father. You should have known." It was pathetic to hear them blame each other, instead of accepting responsibility for their own actions. Even in defeat, they couldn't show an ounce of dignity. Roger finally approached us, walking slowly, as if every step hurt him. "Dad," he said with a broken voice, "I know I have no right to ask you anything, but could you explain why? Why did you keep everything a secret for so many years? Why did you let us believe you were poor?" It was a valid question, though it came decades too late. I got up from the bench and looked him directly. "Roger, do you really want to know why?" He nodded desperately. "Because I wanted to raise a son who would be a good man, regardless of having money or not. I wanted you to work for your own merit, to develop character, to understand the value of things. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I could give you." My voice cracked slightly. "And I wanted to protect you from becoming exactly what you've become today." "But Dad," Roger protested, "if you had told us the truth—" "What?" I interrupted him. "Would you have worked with the same dedication in your career? Would you have appreciated the things you achieved on your own? Would you have developed humility and empathy? Roger, look at what you did when you thought I had nothing. Imagine what you would have done if you knew I had millions." Matthew approached his father hesitantly. "Dad, why did you do this to Grandpa? He was always good to you." My grandson's innocent question was like a slap to Roger. How could he explain to his own son that he had tried to rob his grandfather? How could he justify years of manipulation and lies? "Matthew, I thought I was helping," Roger began. But his son interrupted him. "No, Dad. You knew Grandpa was fine. I told you many times that he remembered everything, that he was perfectly lucid, that he didn't need help. But you didn't listen because you didn't want to listen." Matthew's 16-year-old wisdom was devastating in its simplicity. Robert discreetly approached. "Arthur, do you want us to take Matthew home? I think it's been enough for today." I nodded gratefully. My grandson had experienced too much adult drama in one day. "Matthew, my boy, would you like to come home with me tonight? We can order pizza and watch movies like the old days." His eyes lit up for the first time all day. "Can I, Grandpa? Really?" Roger went rigid. "Matthew is my son. He has to come home with me." But I stood firm. "Roger, the court order says visits must be supervised. Tonight I'm supervising. Tomorrow we will discuss more permanent arrangements." The expression on Roger's face was one of pure pain. But I wasn't going to budge on this. Matthew needed emotional stability after today's trauma. "Besides," I continued, "I think you and Claire need time to discuss the legal implications of what happened today. The judge mentioned a criminal investigation. You should probably consult a criminal defense attorney." The reality of their legal situation hit Roger like a cold wave. He had been so focused on the emotional aspect of losing my love and his inheritance that he had momentarily forgotten he could face time in jail. Claire approached with a panicked look. "Mr. Arthur, is there any way you can talk to the prosecutor? You could tell them you don't want to press charges." It was unbelievable. Even after everything that had happened, she still expected me to save her from the consequences of her own actions. "Claire," I replied with a bitter smile, "you and Roger created this situation with your lies and manipulations. Now you'll have to face the consequences as adults." "But think about Matthew," Roger said desperately. "If I go to prison, what will happen to him?" It was the first time all day he had mentioned his son as anything other than a tool to gain sympathy. "Roger, you should have thought about Matthew before you decided to defraud his grandfather. You should have thought about Matthew before you manipulated him to get false testimony. You should have thought about Matthew before you risked your family's stability for greed." Matthew looked at me with sad but determined eyes. "Grandpa, can I live with you if Dad has to go away?" The The question was simple, but loaded with enormous implications. Matthew, my boy, you will always have a home with me. No matter what happens, you will be safe and loved. I hugged him tightly, feeling him relax in my arms for the first time in months. The judge established that we need psychological evaluations, I reminded Roger. I suggest you use that time to truly reflect on your actions and decisions, not just about the money, but about what kind of father and person you want to be in the future. It was my last attempt to reach some decency in my son. Although my hopes were very low, Robert opened his car door. "Arthur, are you ready to go?" I nodded, but before getting into the car, I turned to Roger one last time. "Roger, throughout your life I gave you unconditional love. I gave you security, education, values, and a home full of affection. Today I discovered that when you thought I had nothing left to give you, you decided to take even my dignity and my autonomy. That is a lesson about your character that I will never forget." Tears streamed down Roger's cheeks as we drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing alone on the courthouse steps, with Claire by his side, but clearly distanced. They had gotten exactly what they deserved. They had each other, and the misery they had created together. It was an image that would haunt me for a long time, not out of pity for them, but out of sadness for what might have been if they had chosen love over greed. 3 months have passed since that terrible day in court, and my life has found a new normal that I never imagined possible. Matthew now lives with me permanently after psychological evaluations determined it was best for his emotional well-being. My house, which Roger described as the home of a vagrant, is now filled with adolescent laughter, music, friends coming over to study, and a vital energy that had been absent for too long. This morning, as I was making pancakes for breakfast, Matthew ran down the stairs with a big smile. "Grandpa, guess what? I got accepted into the student exchange program in France. Can I go?" His enthusiasm was contagious, and seeing how he had blossomed in these months away from his father's toxicity was one of the few good things that had come out of this terrible situation. "Of course you can go, my boy. That's what your educational fund is for." The criminal investigation against Roger and Claire had resulted in charges for attempted fraud and financial abuse of the elderly. Roger received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service in a nursing home, which I found ironically appropriate. Claire received a similar sentence, but also temporarily lost her professional license. Both had to sell their house to pay fines and legal fees. Matthew still visited his father twice a week under supervision, but it was clear that the relationship had changed forever. My grandson had matured in ways that broke my heart, understanding realities about his family that no teenager should have to face. "Grandpa," he told me one afternoon while we were doing homework together, "do you think Dad really loves me, or was he just using me to get your money?" The question hurt me deeply, because I had struggled with the same doubt about Roger's love for me. "Matthew, I think your dad loves you in his own way, but he made very bad decisions that hurt the whole family. Sometimes the people we love disappoint us, and we have to learn to love them from a distance to protect ourselves." It was a hard lesson for a young person, but a necessary one. Robert came to visit us every week, not only to review my finances, but because he had become a father figure to Matthew and a dear friend to me. "Arthur," he said to me during one of his visits, "I've been thinking about the foundation we discussed. Are you ready to make it a reality?" We had talked about creating a foundation to help elderly victims of family abuse, and after my experience, this had become a personal passion. "Yes, Robert. I want my experience to serve a positive purpose. If my pain can help other elderly people protect themselves from greedy families, then it will have been worth it. The Arthur Foundation had been officially established last week, with an initial fund of $250,000. It would provide free legal services and psychological support for seniors facing financial abuse from their own families. One afternoon, while Matthew was at school, I received an unexpected call. It was Roger. His voice sounded different, more humble, more broken. "Dad, could you come see me? There are things I need to tell you." I had been waiting for this call for months. "Roger, do you know you have a restraining order? I can't see you without supervision." "I know," he replied. "I've arranged for us to meet at my therapist's office. There are things I need to confess." I decided to go more out of curiosity than hope for reconciliation. The therapist's office was a neutral and safe place. When I arrived, Roger was sitting on a couch, looking much older than he was. The stress of the last few months had taken its physical and emotional toll. "Dad, thank you for coming." His first words were filled with genuine tears. "I need you to know the whole truth." "The truth," Roger continued, "is that Claire and I had been having financial problems for 2 years. We had made bad investments. We had credit card debts and were about to lose our house. When Mom died, we thought your house would be the solution to our problems." It was a confession I had expected. The admission that everything had been about money from the start. "But Dad," he continued with tears running down his cheeks, "the part I'm most ashamed of is that I knew you weren't senile. I knew you were perfectly fine, but I was so desperate, so afraid of losing everything, that I convinced Claire that we could argue mental incompetence. We thought it would be easy because you're older and live alone." The brutal honesty of his confession was both painful and liberating. "Matthew?" I asked. Matthew never knew what we were planning. I manipulated him without him realizing it. I asked him innocent questions about you, and then I distorted his answers. He truly believed he was helping to protect you. At least my grandson had been as innocent as I thought. It was a small comfort amidst so much betrayal. "Roger," I said after a long silence, "I appreciate your honesty, but it comes too late. For months you made me feel like I was losing my mind. You made me doubt my own competence. You humiliated me in front of strangers. And you nearly took away my autonomy. An apology cannot undo that damage." My voice was firm, but not cruel. I had found peace in the truth, but I didn't forget. "I know," Roger responded. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize how terrible it was. And I wanted to ask if there is any way Matthew can benefit from the fund you established without including me. He doesn't deserve to be punished for my mistakes." It was the first time Roger had genuinely put his son's interests above his own. "Matthew is already benefiting from the fund," I informed him. "His education is fully paid for, including college and graduate school. He also has a fund that will activate when he turns 25 to help him establish himself in adult life. All of this is protected from any influence from you or Claire." The relief in Roger's eyes was palpable. "Dad, is there any chance that one day you can forgive me?" His question was pleading, but I had thought about this a lot. "Roger, forgiveness is something that is earned, not something that is requested. If you really want my forgiveness, prove it by being a better father to Matthew, by being a better person overall, and by living with the consequences of your actions without blaming others. Maybe in a few years we can talk about forgiveness." When I left that office, I felt that a chapter of my life had closed. Roger had shown more honesty in an hour than in the preceding years. But the damage was done. Some relationships can be repaired. Others can only be mourned. I had chosen to focus on building something new and positive with Matthew, instead of trying to repair something that was fundamentally broken. That night, as Matthew and I were having meatloaf for dinner together, I told him about my meeting with his father. "Do you think Dad has really changed?" he asked me. "I think your dad finally understands what he lost," I replied. "But real change takes time and actions, not just words." Matthew nodded wisely, showing once again that maturity that the situation had forced him to develop. "Grandpa," Matthew said after a moment, "I want you to know that I'm very happy living with you. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a stable family." His words filled my heart with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I had lost a son, but I had gained the opportunity to be the grandfather I always wanted to be. Now, as I write this story, I can see Matthew in the backyard on the phone with his friends about his plans for France. The house is full of life again, of future plans, of hope. My estate continues to grow under Robert's wise administration. And now, a significant part of it is destined to help others who have gone through similar experiences to mine. I learned that money really does reveal people's character, but not always in the way we expect. Sometimes it reveals the worst in those we think we know. And sometimes it reveals strengths in ourselves that we didn't know we had. In the end, my experiment of keeping my wealth a secret worked perfectly. It showed me exactly who each person in my family was when they thought I had nothing to give them. The lesson was painful, but priceless. And now, with Matthew by my side and a renewed purpose in my life, I can say that knowing the truth was worth it, no matter how bitter it was. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by clicking the Super Thanks button. That way, I'll be able to write many more stories like this. Thank you very much in advance. And you? What would you do in this person's place? I really want to know your opinion, so write it here in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and also tell me where you heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to Dad's Advice. There are many others waiting for you. A big hug, and until next time.